Abayomi Joseph, Odewale, lecturer at the Kaduna Polytechnic and fellow Ominira Initiative for Economic Advancement, joins me now to speak about PAPSS, that's the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System. Not PAPO, not UGI or AKAMU, no. PAPSS, PAPSS. Welcome to you, and thank you for joining us today.
Good morning. It's my pleasure to be here this morning on the show.
Thank you very much. Now let's get started. From my intro earlier, PAPSS was launched in Accra, Ghana last year. From that time till now, it's like a year now, or more than a year actually. How would you, okay, no, let me start from the beginning basis. Let me not assume that all our viewers understand what I'm saying, even from the intro. How did we get to PAPSS? I would like you to explain that. And yes, how did we get to PAPSS? Let's talk about the history of PAPSS, yes. And what does PAPSS really mean for the African continent? Then we can go into all other issues.
All right. Thank you very much for that question. PAPSS is a Pan-African Payment and Settlement System. It came up from African Union and with the support of the African Bank. So they were trying to unify the African markets because currently African market is isolated. Countries are isolated economic-wise, and so through that platform, they are trying to create a payment system that will connect African countries together, and then that will enhance smooth payments instantly across borders. Because currently, due to our isolated payment infrastructure, there is no coordinated payments infrastructure that is Pan-African currently. So we rely on outside countries, mostly developed countries, Association of Central Banks of Developed Countries. They are the one processing intra-African transactions. And for one African to transact with another African, the exporter or the importer, like for instance, the exporter would need to transact with dollars mostly, and this is not good for the economy in the sense that the resource for dollars, and that put pressure on the local currency. So that is what PAPSS is trying to eliminate, that dollarization of the African economy. We are in Africa. Our transactions should be, we should have a Pan-African system that we settle our payment system without relying on external or third countries to developed countries to process our transactions. So that was how they came up with PAPSS, and with the support of African Union and African Bank, and the support of African central banks, and the commercial banks will key into that, and also financial, all these fintechs and other all these microfinance banks. So they will key into that for smooth payments. Because currently, for an African to, maybe a Nigerian, to transact with someone in Ghana, the Nigerian will have to get source dollar, and in buying that, they are losing money. And for that money to be processed outside Africa, there will be some charges for processing and all that, and before it gets to the recipients. So all this will add to the cost of production in the long run, and it do take days, maybe 3 days, 4 days before it is cleared. So the PAPSS system will eliminate that obstacle, which is an impediment to intra-African trade.
Do you think that with the launch, of course, I know that it started, your pilot of PAPSS started with WAMS,
yes,
the West African Monetary Zone that included Nigeria and some other West African countries, and now it has extended to other countries. Do you think that having PAPSS is really the silver bullet for us? Because I'm taking a look at, for example, Europe, and they have the euro as its currency.
Yes.
There was a time that it was an idea in Africa that, okay, we should have a single African currency. Was it a former leader of Libya, Muammar Gaddafi, also was part of that? Okay, no, Africa should have a currency of its own. So do you think that PAPSS with the launch of PAPSS, or even existing right now, with PAPSS existing right now, it sufficiently addresses that problem in terms of also boosting intra-African trade.
Yes.
I don't know if you
Yes,
understand
I
what,
get the
yes,
question.
yeah, what I'm saying.
So PAPSS, in the real sense, is not the silver bullet because we have myriads of challenges surrounding why intra-African trade is very low. So perhaps we just enhance the system, the payment system, because when we are talking about trade and funds, they are hand in hand. So, so when a trader offers goods across borders, then they want to see their money in return. So with that, it just enhances the trade, and also it enhances the trade for SMEs, and it will increase the transaction actually. But in order to increase intra-African trade, because of the way Africa is currently structured, the market in Africa is more of a commodity base. Most of the products in Africa, they are more like unrefined commodities, just commodities. So if you look at the African countries generally, most of African countries, if we look at the export and imports, we will see that most of the goods that are being imported are manufactured goods, so which are not available in Africa. Because for someone to trade, one needs to get value in the process. So the main problem is to enhance the production capacity in Africa, because currently the intra-African trade is around 15 to 18%. So that's why I said perhaps it's not the silver bullet, but we need to work on logistics to enhance the movement of goods and services across borders, because currently there is no, there are issues around border, the visa for Africans across borders. So one will not be surprised that some Africans are still being denied visa within African countries when they want to move goods and services. So these are the barriers. So that's why I said perhaps it's not the silver bullet, but it will enhance the intra-African trade transactions.
Okay, let's take a look at the three core functions perhaps of PAPSS, which should be around instant payments, perhaps net settlement, as well as pre-funding. Out of those three core functions, since its launch in 2022, how far do you think it has done? Because we know that commercial banks are also supposed to hook on to the platform, as well as being facilitated by central banks in Africa. How do you think that we have done so far in terms of someone that monitors what is happening in that space, in terms of instant payment? Because I was listening to the head of PAPSS, Mike Odewale,
Yes.
yeah, and he was talking about the settlement time, for example. So I would like you to speak on that.
So like I said earlier, currently most transactions across borders in Africa are done outside the continent, and it normally takes days for the payment and settlement to be cleared. So with PAPSS, we enhance that processing time. They will instantly be received. How PAPSS works is that once one pay through the local bank in Nigeria, it will be routed through the central bank of Nigeria, and then the central bank of Nigeria will communicate with maybe someone is transacting with someone in Ghana, to Central Bank of Ghana, and then it will be routed to the commercial bank or microfinance bank of the recipient. So currently, how far we've done, PAPSS has done, currently about 9 countries in Africa out of 55 countries in Africa.
That's still poor.
Yes, very poor. I've keyed into that PAPSS system currently. So most of these countries are in West Africa. The remaining 3 out of the 9, they are in East Africa. So the rest are yet to key into that. And that was why President Ruto, President of Kenya, said it about 2 months ago that African countries should key into that initiative, because there is no need for us using dollar for intra-African trade. We should be able to use our currencies in order to ease the pressure of forex on local currency, so that can be channeled to other things and expand the market. So currently we have 9 African countries, so we need to do more in integrating and onboarding the remaining countries into the system. And the target is that by 2025, the central banks of remaining countries will key into that, and also the commercial banks. So by then, we believe that something positive will come up with that integration and onboarding.
What do you think might actually be the challenge facing PAPSS concerning other African countries? Because it seems that more of West African countries are really keen onto this platform. If we're taking a look at 9 countries in Africa where we have 54, about 55 countries, that's about 16% of the continent.
Yeah,
that is
low.
poor, very low, but I can imagine that those at PAPSS watching now will be saying, okay, Nancy, give us a break. We're just like about 1 year. But 16% of the African continent keying into this. What challenges do you see, especially with other regions across Africa? I know also concerning this PAPSS, the Arab Monetary Fund is also trying to get on if they haven't gotten on now. The challenge for PAPSS, Central Africa, South Africa, East Africa, and all of that, what challenges really are we seeing with these regions not keen to PAPSS as, you know, as fast as we expect, though that PAPSS also has have a target for itself?
Yes. Maybe I should start from West Africa. From what I said earlier, I said most West African countries are already into PAPSS system, because right now, when they test run the PAPSS, that was last year, it was done within Nigeria and Ghana, and it was fast, and there have been reviews on that. So what made it easier for West African countries to key into that is that they already had a system in place through ECOWAS system. These are West African monetary zones. So it was able, it was easier for them to be able to easily key into that PAPSS system. So, but for other West African, other East African, Southern African countries, I don't know, maybe, I'm not sure about their regional payment. Maybe they have any regional payment already in place already. So one other thing that made it possible for West African countries is that some banks, even before these PAPSS of a thing, they already, there was a system for transactions across borders, from Nigeria to Ghana to...
Across the commercial banks?
Yes. So some commercial banks already have that system in place. So I don't mean there has been a system in most of these regional regions, so it would have been easier for them. So if but countries, they have their own settlement system already. So if they can aggregate that and then connect to the system, so it may take time going forward.
Okay, as you were talking, what was also coming to my mind, perhaps why we've seen the ease of payments across border in West Africa, especially from commercial banks in West Africa or coming from Nigeria, is that many Nigerian banks that are big banks have their own,
yes,
you know, they have,
West African
yes,
countries.
so perhaps that's why it's easier. Do you think so? Because, for example, we have Access Bank here, we have Access Bank in other countries, we have FexBank, so it's EcoBank, and I know that these banks are hooked on to PAPSS,
yes,
for example. So is that also what is making it easier? That many Nigerian commercial banks have presence in those West African countries, and perhaps they're also going to other African countries too.
Yes, Pan-African payments and settlement system is like a road network, like an expressway, and then you have other roads connecting to it. So these other roads are like regions, countries connecting to that PAPSS. PAPSS is not here to eliminate the existing payment system, and is here to integrate, to aggregate all those systems. So that was why it was easier for most of these West African countries to easily key into that. So if I don't believe there is a system for other regional areas in Africa, so it would have been easier for them to easily key into that. So for instance, in Nigeria, before these NIBs, for payment and settlements, it do takes about weeks, even days, before payments made in maybe Lagos to Kaduna or Kogi will be processed and settled. So there is a kind of waiting time then. So with the gradual integration of the payment in Nigeria, we had NIBS, and now we can see the volume of transactions within Africa, within Nigeria. So that is what PAPSS is trying to achieve, to integrate the payment and settlement systems of countries to that network in order to enhance instant payments across borders, so that that can lead to more expansion in the African market and for prosperity in the process.
How will this even impact businesses that are watching right now? Because I can assume some people may just be watching this and hearing this for the first time, even though that PAPSS has been in existence, at least officially launched since last year. So explain perhaps to a Nigerian vendor right now that has a business in Nigeria and that has customers in Ghana and all of that. How can they really take advantage of PAPSS and get settled in their own local currency?
All right. Thank you very much for that question. The thing is that PAPSS, like I said during my introduction, they are trying to eliminate dollarization of African economy, and which means that transactions from originating country will be done in the local currency of that country, and then it will be processed, and then the recipient will get it in the local currency of that recipient country, so without involving dollar in the whole process. So for an SME in Nigeria, maybe initially they do, before they want to pay for, they have to pay for someone in Ghana, maybe they have to buy dollars. So right now, there is no need for that. So, and that will save them a lot of money in sourcing for Forex, and with that, they can pay in their local currency, Naira. And then the person in Ghana will receive the money in Ghana cedis easily, instantly, without all these delays for days, for weeks, and then there will be liquidity, free flow of money for other transactions, for other businesses, ideas, and all that.
So that means for a business owner listening right now, he or she can take advantage of this PAPSS, which we're talking about, because it can also be person to person, person to business.
Yes.
As it were, through your commercial bank.
Yes.
Isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. Most of the African banks, Nigerian banks, I don't want to mention names, so they already have that platform on their system. They can just approach any of their banks and tell them they want to transact. It can be processed within the countries that have already keyed into that system. Currently, 9 countries. We have Zambia, Zimbabwe, Nigeria, Ghana, and they have about 9. So they can make that transaction currently. You can just approach their banks in Nigeria and do the transaction, and it will be processed.
And just also to say here that the Central Bank of Nigeria, I don't know if you saw it, fixed the Pan-African settlement system limit for $20,000 per quarter. That's for a customer, and $200,000 for an authorized dealer. That was a statement from the Central Bank of Nigeria Trade and Exchange Department. Yes, I think that was from Mrs. Nnaji from Trade and Investment Department of the Central Bank of Nigeria. So I just needed to update our viewers for that. So it's not as if perhaps you just go and be, there's also a limit that the Central Bank has put to it. So just as we round up, is there any other thing that you need to say, perhaps what we should expect from PAPSS? It's just 1 year plus now. Yes. What, as a watcher of that space, what are you expecting from PAPSS, perhaps in the next 1 year or from now to the next 5 years? That in the next 5 years, if we take a look at the African continent, what should we say? Oh, that how far would PAPSS have gone?
In the next 5 years, I want to see an African payment system that is that has already integrated all the African countries into the system, and it's very important for the central banks of African countries to, the head of states to compel, persuade their central banks to key into it, because currently the PAPSS system will save Africa 5 billion US dollar per year because of in the process of converting money to local currencies of maybe dollar, as they are moving the money, because it's not being processed outside Nigeria. So as they are moving the money from one country to another in Europe or most of the other maybe Asian countries, there are charges, and this affects the cost of services and goods in the end.
Okay.
So I envision a country, a continent that is fully integrated into the Pan-African payment and settlement system.
Thank you very much, Abayomi Joseph Odewale, for joining us today and shedding light on PAPSS. Abayomi Joseph Odewale is a lecturer and a fellow Ominira Initiative for Economic Advancement, and we've been talking about the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, PAPSS. If you're just hearing about it, just do well to read more about it, especially if you are a business owner that you do cross-border transactions as well as cross-border, cross-border issues with your customers. All right, that's much you can take on today's edition of the program. Thank you all for joining us. I am Nancy Najibi, the best you can be, and not the change that you want to see by now.